remember the first time I saw Charlie. It wasn't anything particularly special, but I couldn't shake the memory of that moment. I was 24, young, idealistic, with dreams of painting and traveling the world. At the time, I had no idea that the man sitting across from me in that crowded coffee shop would change the entire course of my life. He was sitting at a table, reading through some papers, and I noticed the way he adjusted his glasses, how effortlessly he commanded the attention of the room without even trying. When he first spoke to me, it was like the world paused. "I'm sorry, I think you're in my seat," he said, with a slight smile, pointing to the empty chair next to him. It was one of those moments where everything just felt right, like the universe was aligning for a reason. We talked for hours that day, about everything and nothing. He asked me about my art, my hopes, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like someone was genuinely interested in me. It was so easy to talk to him. He wasn't just charming, he listened in a way that made me feel understood, like he actually cared. And then, he asked if I'd like to meet again. I couldn't say yes fast enough. I was a shy, somewhat insecure woman back then. My art was my escape, but in my heart, I was always longing for something more. Charlie gave me that. He gave me the world. His passion for his work was intoxicating, and he made me feel like I mattered. He would take me to nice restaurants, to art galleries, to places I never imagined I could experience. He treated me like I was the most important person in the world. We didn't rush into anything. Our relationship was like a slow burn. But after a few months, I was already thinking about the future with him. A few years passed, and then we were living together in a cozy apartment, our lives intertwining more each day. It was beautiful, perfect, I thought. We had a life together, built on mutual respect and love. After 2 years, he proposed. It wasn't extravagant or over the top, but it was perfect for us. I remember the way he looked at me when he asked me to marry him, his eyes full of sincerity, hope, and a little bit of fear. And I said yes without hesitation. I was so in love with him, so sure that we were meant to be together forever. We got married a year later, surrounded by family and friends, and for the first time, I felt like everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. We made vows that day, promises to love each other through the good times and bad. And at that moment, I believed it. I thought our love could survive anything. The first sign that something was off came so subtly, I barely noticed it at first. Charlie's work began to consume him in ways I hadn't expected. At first, I understood. He was ambitious, driven, and I admired that about him. But then, the late nights started to become routine. He'd come home so exhausted that he'd eat dinner in silence, barely even looking at me, and then retreat to his office to finish whatever work he had left. It was like he was physically here, but mentally somewhere else. I tried to make it work. I cooked dinner, tried to keep the conversation going, made sure to remind him about the little things, how his favorite book was finally back in stock, or how the weather was beautiful that day. But he was always distracted, his mind racing with deadlines and meetings. I started to feel invisible. I wasn't expecting him to drop everything for me, but I just wanted him to see me. I was here. I needed him. And it wasn't just about the lack of time together. It was how the little things started slipping away. He would forget anniversaries, even the simplest gestures like telling me I looked nice or asking how my day went. It hurt more than I realized at the time. The silence at dinner was deafening. I tried to fill it with small talk, but he would nod absent-mindedly, eyes glued to his phone. I started to retreat into myself. The emptiness in the house grew louder. I spent more time in the studio, painting for hours just to escape the silence that filled our home. It wasn't that I wasn't still in love with him. I was. I loved him with all of my heart. But he wasn't here with me anymore, not really. And no matter how much I tried to make things feel normal, it wasn't enough. It was in the midst of all this change that Andrew appeared. I had no intention of meeting anyone new. After all, I had Charlie, and I had a life that, while lonely at times, still had meaning. But Andrew was different from anyone I had met before. He was one of my students, and he was clearly talented. His paintings were full of raw emotion and depth. But what drew me in most was how he saw me, not just as a teacher, but as someone who could offer him something more. At first, he would ask about my techniques, about the inspiration behind my work, but it soon turned into something else. We would talk about life, about dreams, about the things we wanted to create. He was so present, so focused on me in a way that I hadn't felt in a long time. It was strange at first, because he was so much younger than I was, 22, full of hope and ambition, and yet, he seemed more mature than some of my older friends. I didn't intend for it to happen, but we started spending more time together outside of class. We'd grab lunch after a lecture, walk around the park, talk about everything and nothing. He was funny, kind, and for some reason, he made me feel like I mattered. When he talked, it was like he was seeing a part of me that had been buried for years. There was something about him that reminded me of who I used to be before life got so complicated. He made me feel young again, full of life, like there were still possibilities ahead of me. He paid attention to me in ways I hadn't realized I was craving. And it wasn't even about physical attraction at first, it was about the way he made me feel alive again. I could talk to him about art, about my frustrations with Charlie, and about my insecurities in ways I had never been able to with anyone before. I told myself it was harmless. Just a friendship. But the more we talked, the more the lines blurred. The way he looked at me made my heart race. And then, one day, he touched my arm as we walked down the street, and I felt something inside me stir. It was a spark, small at first, but growing. And that was the moment I knew I was at a crossroads. I didn't want to hurt Charlie. But in Andrew's company, I felt seen again, and that was a feeling I couldn't ignore. Charlie's work only intensified. He was rarely home. When he was, he'd retreat to his study, phone in hand, checking emails and making calls. We barely spoke anymore, and if we did, it was about logistics. He would ask about the dogs or mention a work trip coming up, but there was no warmth, no affection. I began spending more time with Andrew. We would meet for lunch, walk around the city, and talk about everything. Andrew's life was still open to possibility. He hadn't become jaded by the world yet. He reminded me of how I used to be, full of dreams, full of color. We were painting the town together, in a way. The more I saw him, the more I realized I was falling into a place I wasn't sure I could escape from. At night, I would lie in bed next to Charlie, the space between us widening with each passing day. He would fall asleep almost immediately, his back turned to me, and I would stay awake, listening to the hum of the city through the window, feeling like a stranger in my own life. I knew he was still the man I had married, but we had become so different. It felt like we were both living in the shadows of who we once were. I missed the days when we laughed together, when we'd talk for hours without realizing the time. Andrew was a breath of fresh air. But I knew deep down that something wasn't right. Still, I couldn't help but crave the attention he gave me. It wasn't love, it was more like a lifeline I was too scared to let go of. The cracks in our relationship started small, almost imperceptible at first. It was the little things, the moments I used to cherish with Charlie that began to slip away without notice. At first, I told myself it was just a phase. That it was normal for couples to go through rough patches. But the more time passed, the more I realized it wasn't just a temporary issue. It was a slow, suffocating erosion of what we had. Charlie came home later and later, sometimes after I had already gone to bed. He would tiptoe through the apartment, not wanting to wake me, as though he didn't want to disturb my dreams. But it was more than that. It was as if he was trying to keep his distance, like he was afraid of the space we shared. I would wake up to an empty side of the bed, and even though I knew he was in the apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was alone. Alone in a life I had built with someone who didn't need me anymore. I began to resent him, not in an angry way, but in a quiet, aching way. I resented how he'd disappear into his office after dinner, his laptop his only companion. I resented how he would come home exhausted, but never reach out to me, never ask how my day had been, as though I had become a mere afterthought in his busy life. I remember one particular night, sitting at the dinner table alone, waiting for him. I had cooked his favorite meal, a dish I hadn't made in months, hoping to revive something between us. I set the table with care, even placed a candle in the center, an effort to recreate the ambience we had once shared, those warm evenings filled with laughter and love. But when he walked in, his eyes were glazed, his focus elsewhere. He barely noticed the effort I had put in, didn't even comment on the food. He muttered a quick thanks before picking up his phone, staring at the screen in silence. The loneliness in that moment felt unbearable. I could feel the weight of the years settling between us, invisible but heavy. Every word that was left unsaid, every touch that had been forgotten, filled the room with a tension I couldn't shake. I watched him eat, his face so distant, and for the first time in years, I felt like a stranger in my own home. After dinner, Charlie retreated to his office, leaving me sitting at the table, the remnants of a meal we had once shared as a couple. The dogs circled around me, sensing my sadness, but it was the silence that overwhelmed me. I wanted to cry, but there was no point anymore. The tears would change nothing. The truth was becoming clear, but I didn't want to face it. The foundation of our relationship was crumbling, and I didn't know how to rebuild it. Or if I even wanted to anymore. One night, after weeks of silence and distance, I found myself texting Andrew again. It wasn't the first time. He had been messaging me about his work, and I had found excuses to respond. But this time, It was different. I was tired of waiting for Charlie to notice me, tired of pretending that everything was fine. I needed someone to see me. I felt a pang of guilt as I typed the message. What was I doing? Was I betraying Charlie? I didn't know anymore. But I had felt so invisible for so long, and in Andrew's presence, I felt alive again. He wasn't just listening to me, he was engaging, encouraging me to be more than just an artist. He saw me as a person, a woman, not just a wife and teacher. When he suggested we meet up, I didn't hesitate. It was like an impulse I couldn't control, something deep inside me that longed for the kind of attention I wasn't getting from Charlie. I told myself it was innocent, just a friendly meeting. But I knew the truth. I was seeking something I couldn't get at home. We met at a bar, a small, dimly lit place with an intimate atmosphere. The moment I saw Andrew, my heart skipped a beat. He looked different that night, more confident, more sure of himself. His eyes caught mine, and I felt that familiar warmth, that connection that had grown between us over the last few months. He smiled at me, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel invisible. We sat down, talking about everything and nothing at the same time. His words were easy to listen to, his laugh infectious. He was so present, so there with me, and I found myself drawn to him more than I cared to admit. I tried to fight the attraction, telling myself that I was just a lonely woman craving attention. But the more we talked, the more I realized it was something deeper. The tension between us was palpable, and it was hard to ignore. After a while, we stopped talking and just looked at each other. The air felt thick with unspoken words. And then, without warning, he leaned in, brushing his lips against mine. I froze. For a second, I didn't know what to do. I should have pulled away. I should have stopped him. But I didn't. I let the kiss linger, and with it, everything I had been denying, the ache inside me, the need to feel wanted, came flooding to the surface. His lips were warm, insistent, and I felt like I was drowning in the moment. I kissed him back, and all the guilt, all the pain, disappeared for a brief second. The kiss broke, and I pulled away, my breath shaky. I could see the concern in his eyes, but there was also something else, something I hadn't expected. There was a quiet understanding, an unspoken agreement between us. He wasn't just seeing me as a woman in the moment, he was seeing the person I had been before life became so complicated. You don't have to feel guilty, he whispered, his voice low. You deserve to feel alive, Leah. And in that moment, I believed him. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that maybe I hadn't done something irreparable. But deep down, I knew that I had crossed a line that could never be undone. That night, as I drove home, I felt sick to my stomach, a mix of guilt and desire swirling within me. I knew I was hurting Charlie, the man I had promised to love forever. but it was like I had opened a door I couldn't close. The loneliness, the emptiness that had consumed me for so long, had finally found a release. And now, there was no going back. The guilt started to eat away at me like a poison, but I couldn't stop myself. I knew what I was doing was wrong in every sense of the word, but I was so desperate for a connection, for something real. And Andrew, with his youthful energy and untainted optimism, made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. I remember the first time we were alone together, after our kiss that night at the bar. We had agreed to meet at his apartment, just to talk. But when I stepped inside, it was different. There was a tension in the air, something unspoken but undeniable. He led me to the couch, where we sat, barely looking at each other at first. The silence between us was thick, like we were both waiting for something to happen, something we couldn't take back. And then, he reached for me, and everything that had been building inside me spilled over. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel every nerve in my body on fire. I kissed him again, and this time, it wasn't just about feeling seen, it was about wanting something, needing something to fill the emptiness that had consumed me for so long. We didn't talk much in the days that followed. Every stolen moment with Andrew felt like a violation, a betrayal of everything I had once believed in. But at the same time, it felt like a lifeline. I was drowning in the silence of my own life, in the absence of Charlie, and Andrew was the only thing that could pull me from the depths. I tried to tell myself that it wasn't real, that it didn't mean anything. But it did. Every kiss, every touch, every whispered word felt like a secret I couldn't carry, but couldn't let go of either. When I was with him, it felt like I was escaping, running away from everything I had built, from the life with Charlie that had become suffocating. But every time I went back to our apartment, back to Charlie, I would feel that awful, suffocating weight in my chest. I would look at him, at the man I had promised myself to, and I would feel like a stranger in my own skin. He was still the man I loved, but I had betrayed him. And with every passing day, the guilt became harder to ignore. And yet, I couldn't stop seeing Andrew. I couldn't stop the pull, the need to feel alive again, to feel like I was worth something. But as the days wore on, the weight of the secret became unbearable. The moments of guilt would hit me when I least expected it, when I saw Charlie asleep in bed, his face soft and peaceful, completely unaware of what I was doing behind his back. Or when he would ask me how my day was, and I would smile and lie through my teeth, pretending everything was fine when it was slowly unraveling in ways I couldn't control. It was inevitable. The truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how carefully we bury it. And one night, Charlie found the evidence, the small things that had accumulated over the past months, the little signs that could no longer be ignored. It was late when I got home, after spending yet another evening with Andrew. I had just parked the car, my heart still pounding from the rush of seeing him, when I walked into the apartment, only to find Charlie sitting in the living room, his face tight with something I couldn't place. The moment I saw him, I felt the blood drain from my face. "Leah," he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper, like he was trying to prepare himself for something that would shatter him. "We need to talk." I felt like the floor had been pulled out from under me. Every instinct told me to run, to hide, to lie, but my body froze. The look in his eyes told me everything. It was the look of someone who already knew, who had pieced together the puzzle of my betrayal without me saying a word. He held up the small pack of cigarettes I had been careless enough to leave in the glove compartment of my car. I had promised myself I would never get caught. I never thought Charlie would look that closely, but he had, and he had found the clues I had tried so desperately to hide. And then he pulled out the condom, the one I had forgotten about, the one I had kept hidden in my bag for when I was with Andrew. Everything went silent. I could feel my heart breaking in my chest as I watched him process the evidence. His face twisted in confusion, pain, and disbelief. Why, Leah? Why did you do this? His voice cracked, and I couldn't bear it. The tears welled up in my eyes, but I couldn't speak. There was nothing I could say that would make this right. How could I explain this? How could I explain the emptiness, the loneliness, the crushing need for someone to see me the way I used to be seen? I don't know, I whispered, my voice trembling. I'm sorry. I never meant for it to happen. It just did. Charlie stood up slowly, like the weight of the moment was too much to bear. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in months. And I saw the pain in his eyes, the hurt that was far deeper than I had ever imagined. He was broken, and I had broken him. You don't love me anymore, he said, his voice cold, detached. I don't know when it happened, but I can't pretend that I don't see it now. I've been watching you, and I've been waiting for you to come back to me. But you're already gone, Leah. And I can't. I can't be here with you if you're not with me. I wanted to scream, to beg him to forgive me, to fix everything. But I knew, deep down, that there was no going back from this. No matter how sorry I was, no matter how much pain I was in, I had shattered something that could never be put back together. I'm sorry, I whispered again, the words feeling hollow in my mouth. I never meant for it to hurt you. I love you, Charlie. I never stopped loving you. But those words felt empty now, like a lie I had been telling myself for far too long. Charlie didn't say anything else. He just stood there, looking at me like I was a stranger. His eyes were no longer filled with love. They were cold, distant, gone. He left that night, and I never saw him again. It's been a year now, and in some ways, I still can't believe it's over. That the life I had built with Charlie, the man I thought would be by my side forever, is nothing more than a memory now. I've had moments where I thought I wouldn't survive it, where the weight of the pain felt too much to bear, and I wondered if I'd ever feel whole again. But here I am, standing on my own 2 feet, learning to breathe again. I still miss the quiet moments we shared, the times when Charlie would kiss me goodnight or laugh at something silly I said. I miss the idea of what we were. But I've come to realize that the reality of our relationship had changed long before everything fell apart. We had both drifted, lost in our own worlds. And maybe, deep down, I had already let go before I even knew it. After Charlie left, I spent months grieving, not just for the end of our marriage, but for the person I had become in the process. I had let myself slip into a place where I couldn't recognize the woman I was anymore. The guilt and shame that had consumed me felt like chains that kept me from moving forward. I had betrayed him, hurt him in ways I never imagined I could, and that was a hard pill to swallow. But slowly, I began to heal. It wasn't easy, and there were days when I wanted to curl up and disappear. But I kept painting. I poured all my pain, my regret, my longing into the canvas. It was the only place I could be raw, honest with myself. It was the only thing that felt real. And then, one morning, I woke up and realized something. I had to let go of the past. I couldn't change what had happened, no matter how much I wished I could. I had to forgive myself. I had to find a way to forgive us. The dogs are still with me. They're my family now. I've surrounded myself with people who see me, not the woman I was, but the woman I'm becoming. And for the first time in a long while, I'm starting to see her too. Charlie's moved on. I heard through mutual friends that he's remarried, that he has a child now. And while that part of me still aches, because we had built so many dreams together, I know it's not my story anymore. It's his. And I have to let him live it, just as I have to live mine. I've found peace in letting go. It hasn't been easy, and I still have days where the memories creep up on me. But I've learned that healing isn't a straight line. It's messy, it's painful, but it's also beautiful in its own way. And little by little, I'm beginning to believe that there's more ahead of me. A life that's mine. Full of mistakes, yes. Full of heartache, yes. But also full of new beginnings, of growth, of finding who I really am beyond the labels of wife or artist. So, I take it one day at a time. I'm not who I was when this all started. But I'm learning to be someone I can be proud of. And for the first time in a long time, that feels like enough. Maybe there's still hope for me. Maybe there's still hope for us, for who I can be, and who I can love, even if it's not who I thought it would be. And that's okay. Because I'm still here. And I'm still learning to live.
If you like this story and felt connected, please subscribe. Thanks for watching Gabby's Cheating Stories. See you on the next one.